Welcome to this episode of End of Life Conversations. I'm Reverend Wakil David Matthews.
And I'm the Reverend Mother Ana Luisa Armendariz. In this podcast, we share people's experiences with death and dying, grief and loss, and the end of life.
Every episode, we are so honored and blessed to share stories with amazing, compassionate, and wise guests. So let's get started. In this episode, we're going to welcome Reverend John Mabry. Reverend Dr. John Mabry is a United Church of Christ pastor, a spiritual director, novelist, and songwriter. He lives with his veterinarian wife and 3 boxers in the foothills of the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York.
I am delighted to have John here with us. Wakil and I met John a few years ago. We were both at a seminary in Berkeley, California, training as spiritual directors. So I am delighted that we get to hold another space together.
Well, I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much for asking me.
We're really glad to have you. And we usually go through some questions and we want to just have a conversation. So our first question, just to get things started, is when did you first become aware of death?
Well, I think I first had a vague concept of it when I was about 3 years old and my great-grandmother died. And I don't really remember anything about her death specifically. I just remember that she was living across the street from us and then she wasn't, which was confusing at the time. Where did Granny go? And then my grandparents were my first big encounter with death. My mother's parents both died while I was in my late teens and early 20s. But, I had never been close to them. I loved them, but they always lived on the other side of the country. So I was sad that they had passed, but it didn't really hit me emotionally. The first time that really happened was when my dog Claire died. Claire had been my constant companion for 14 years. She was a Whippet lab mix, had been very traumatized as a puppy and had been found on the streets of San Francisco and was scared of her own shadow and suffered PTSD her whole life. And I like to think that I created a safe space for her, and we loved each other desperately. And when she died, she took a part of my soul with me. And I think one of the most amazing things about just how connected it felt like we were was after she died, I put her dog bed up in the attic. And it was about a year when I felt ready to have another dog in the house. And so some friends of ours were going to go away and their dogs needed dog sitting. So we invited their dogs to come and stay with us. And so I went and got the dog bed down from the attic and put it out. And the dogs would not go anywhere near this dog bed.
Wow.
I mean, they would cross to the other side of the room not to have to go by it. So I talked to my spiritual director about this, and I said, what do you think is going on? And she says, well, I think you need to have a talk with Claire and tell her that these other dogs need the bed right now. And so I sat down cross-legged on the floor next to the bed, and I said, Claire, honey, you are welcome to stay here as long as you want. But while these dogs are here, I'd love it if you could go lay on the couch or lay on our bed or anywhere else, but the dogs need this bed right now. And then I felt like an idiot because I was talking to this empty dog bed. So I went into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. And when I came back out, I almost dropped the cup because here were these 2 dogs sitting in the dog bed.
Wow.
Wow. Beautiful.
Lovely.
It's so interesting that many people we talk to, their most impactful dealing with death has been with their animals, their animal companions.
Yeah.
And it's very true that they become a part of us.
Oh, yeah. And when she was dying, we had the vet come out and do the euthanasia at our house. And I told her that when it was my time, I wanted her to meet me.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like we had an understanding. And I am certain that when it is my turn to cross over, Claire is going to be there to greet me.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and it's so impactful because Oftentimes they say that ancestors come and welcome us, right? To go to the light. And I wish I could talk to you at the end of your life. I'd be like, is Claire there? Is Claire there?
Well, come find me and I'll tell you the story.
I will. In the afterlife. Yay. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. So we now have dates for the afterlife. I love it.
I love it. Oh, it'll be fun. So in your current work, how does death impact your work?
Well, in my work as a minister, it impacts it pretty frequently in that everybody has people who die. People are facing death themselves. And when someone they love passes over, they need someone to help them mark it ritually and hold them as they begin the grieving process. And sometimes they need reminding to grieve. And so in my work as a pastor, I certainly do all of that. And some of my richest experiences as a pastor have been accompanying people through the mystery of death and accompanying their families. And in my work as a novelist, I actually think that it is through literature that most of my ideas about death have come. I would say that Charles Williams' novel, All Hallows Eve, is the most important book in my life. And his book, it opens with two young women who don't realize they're dead, but they've just been in a plane crash, and eventually it dawns on them that they are. And as they come to grips with who they were and who they are now, they move toward either community or isolation. And I find that those are always the choices that are before us.
Oh, yeah.
And in Williams' universe, Williams, by the way, was best friends with C.S. Lewis and a good friend of J.R.R. Tolkien's, too. They used to get together every Tuesday and read each other their work. And so their works actually have a lot in common. But in Williams' understanding of things, what we call heaven is community.
Mm. I like that.
And what we call hell is isolation.
Yeah.
And Williams doesn't believe that God sends anybody to heaven or hell. People choose community or they choose isolation. Mm. And if you cultivate community in this life, then you will pass over into community. And if you cultivate isolation in this life, you will pass over into isolation. You always get exactly what you want.
That's pretty powerful.
It is.
Wow.
It is. Because anything else would be coercion.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Our friend last time told us a story about death and working with a family, and his words were, death is a unitive experience, or can be, or should be, perhaps, yes. A community experience. Made me think the same thing, Yeah. Ideally, death is a community experience. It doesn't have to be. You can choose otherwise. But in a good, ideal situation, it can be a community experience.
And one of the greatest examples that I can think of that is one of my dearest friends was a woman named Margaret. She had been my English professor in college. And then when she retired, she moved up to the Bay Area and she started attending my church. And, in our church, we write a lot of our own liturgical music, a lot of our own labyrinth songs, which are very similar to like Taizé or Sufi songs, Dances of Universal Peace songs, that kind of thing. So when Margaret was dying, her family invited the members of the church who wanted to come to gather in her hospital room. And 24 of us showed up, and we brought our guitars, and for the next 3 hours we sang to each other and to her. And as we were singing these sacred songs that were just so dear to our community, one by one people went up to her and held her hand. And she wasn't outwardly conscious, but that didn't really matter. All of us got a chance to have some intimate time with Margaret and say our goodbyes. all while being held in song by the whole community. And while this was going on, it was just so magical. And I had this vision of us bearing her through the veil on our hands and her being received by other hands. So passing from community to community.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Oh, John, it's so powerful. And I want to point out that, for anybody who might be listening, who has this yearning for that kind of community, who hopes that their parent or their spouse has this ending, I know that sometimes I hear stories like this and I wish this for me. And I want everybody out there hearing me, like, it doesn't have to be 24 people in your hospital room. My sister was dying and she was like in the hallway getting moved to a different room when I think about a dozen PTs or somebody from the hospital who knew her from all the years of being in the hospital, they all showed up and surrounded her bed, and somebody take a phone out and like played some song that I still to this day don't remember. And they all sang along to this like pop song. And I just backed away and let them sing. And that was actually the last moment my sister ever spoke. Like, that was it. And when she said, I'm not doing this anymore, she got sung down into the next level too. And so I cherish your story, and I want everybody to know that it's available to all of us. Just call and show up and put the iPod on or whatever you have.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's not only something we can hope for ourselves, but something we can manifest for our beloveds. So that's such a great call. Thank you. God, it's brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, John.
I'd like to talk a little bit about how these themes have shown up in my latest novel, Ash Wednesday. In this book, a farmer goes out into his field and sees a 6x6 pink cube. And cut into the cube is a sculpture of a man at the moment of his death flying into a windshield. And the farmer recognizes the man. He knows this person. And over the next several days, more and more of these cubes start appearing in his field. And there are other people from the town, and they all depict them at the moment of their death. And some of them are much older in the statues, and some of them are similar to the age that they are now. And some of the deaths are violent, and some of them are peaceful. And word gets out, and the townspeople start coming out to this farm to look at these cubes. And there's this kind of carnival atmosphere. It's all kind of horror show and fun and games and everything until the man from the very first cube actually dies, and he dies in exactly the way that the cube depicts.
Right.
And so now the entire town kind of freaks out, and people start acting out in ways that are not healthy. And some people deal with their grief responsibly, and a lot of people don't. And one of the main characters, Peg, who is the pastor of the local congregational church, realizes that this is going to spin out of control and someone's going to get seriously hurt.
Right.
Unless the town can come together and do a collective work of grieving. There needs to be a public catharsis. There needs to be a place to ground the energies that are kind of driving everyone a little nuts. And so the town is in the California Central Valley, but most of the townspeople are immigrants from Sweden. And so there's this Swedish tradition of a longhouse where you build a fire pit in the middle of the longhouse and you set it ablaze, and people bring their grief and put it in the fire in various symbolic ways. And so she invites they build a longhouse and they invite the entire town, and the townspeople come, and to everyone's kind of amazement, people start pouring out their grief, and they have made artwork around how they feel, and they put that in the fire. And so the book really is about how do we confront the evidence of our mortality?
Yeah.
When we come face to face with the fact that we will die and that we can't escape it, how do we deal with that? And there are different ways of dealing with it. There are healthy ways and there are unhealthy ways of dealing with it. And the healthiest way of dealing with it is in community.
And in communication. Yeah.
Yeah, that really is the central theme of the book. And along the way, Peg encounters grief of her own that just shakes her to her core.
I think that book really was profound to me. And one of the things about it was that many of us, and this is why we're doing this podcast, is that many of us would rather not talk about this.
Right.
Would rather not think about it. Right. And so in this book, a town is not given the choice anymore. Guess what? It's in your face,
Yeah.
And the reason and how that plays out with the different people in the town it is fascinating and revealing and also very real. I think part of the reason that many of us choose to ignore it is because of that, maybe that fear of the way that we would respond, and the fear of lost control, of a loss of control. There's a lot of fears around that, and we may get to it, maybe get to the question later about your own fears. But thank you for sharing that. I really did find that a profound reminder of how we forget, or how we choose to forget, and just what might happen if we had no choice and we had to remember. Yeah, that was great.
I have a question. So your book has been out for a year. How have people received this? How have they integrated this notion of collective grieving?
Well, it's hard to get noticed as a novelist these days. So I wouldn't say that very many people have read it, but those who have read it, I think, have not just enjoyed it, but I think have been very moved by it. I've gotten just some amazing letters, and some of the reviews that are up there on Amazon have moved me. I certainly think that it has helped some people process their own grief and helped them navigate approaching their own mortality. The gestation of this book and the writing of this book happened during COVID, and in some ways it's a mirror of that, because as a culture, as a civilization, we were confronting our own deaths. It was on our doorstep. The angel of death was passing over, and we never knew whose house it was going to stop at. And we knew people who were grieving, and there were so many losses beyond just the loss of life that we were grieving, the loss of freedom, the loss of community that wasn't virtual.
Yeah.
There was so much that we were grieving. And all of that was just poured into this book, because I was so fascinated with the notion that what we were going through was a collective grief process. And so I wanted to explore what a collective grief process looked like, and the implications that had for community or isolation.
Yeah, we all were dealing with isolation, loneliness, in many cases, very deep sadness, fear of the unknown. Yeah, all of those things that go along with grieving and go along with end of life, kind of hand in hand.
And it almost feels like your book is still extremely pertinent, because we're still 3 years from that start, and it's still not over. It's still not gone. And we're still seeing all the issues that have been born from this. There's still sadness and isolation and fear And our collective grief is still not done. We're still not finished. And I feel like just thinking about this with your book right now, people make assumptions that they're past it and they're out and their lives are normal. But when you get to really sit with people, they've lost parts of themselves that don't have a job or have an isolating job, or they lost neighbors or their parents or their pets because it was strange to go into vet's office. I mean, we have so many little pieces of grief that we could attend to and don't know how to.
Yeah, exactly. I think just giving ourselves and each other permission to feel grief and to express grief is a profoundly countercultural thing, because we, I think we have an allergy to what we consider negative emotions in our culture.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just so profoundly unhealthy, because what do we do with this energy?
Yeah.
Right. We bury it.
We bury it. Exactly. Exactly.
It becomes our shadows.
One of the things that makes me crazy as a pastor is that I will find out maybe weeks after the fact that one of my parishioners' dog or cat has died, or a family member has died. Why am I hearing about this 3 or 4 weeks after the fact? If a parishioner's cat is dying, I would love to come over and anoint the cat with oil for healing and rest.
Hallelujah.
And cry with them and hold them, the parishioner, and ask them what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that a shameful thing? Why is that an embarrassing thing?
Yeah.
Just because it's a pet.
It sounds like that's the challenge, right? Is having people feel like they can actually tell all the aspects of their lives that are in need of anointing and bearing witness to, right? Like any number of things could be amenable for you to show up.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Sufi saying of "die before you die," is in recognition that we have little deaths every day. Each breath in its own way. You expel your breath, you've just given up your breath of life, and now you get a new one. You make room for a new one. And of course, the losses that we're talking about, the larger losses of pets or animals or jobs or partnerships or relationships, or so many things, faith in our government.
Yeah. Or a tree in the park. Like I have been grieving the loss of a tree. Like I literally have to go by it all the time with my kids and just be like, I'm so sorry that you just couldn't make it here. Like it's been hot, it's been hard. And, my kids are used to it, but there's hundreds of people passing every day.
Yeah.
And there's this tree that's died in the middle of this field. And it strikes me so much every day when I walk there.
I think I have an advantage in some ways, because I'm a very emotional person who wears their heart on their sleeve. Unlike my wife, who is from Vermont. And if you know Vermonters, that's all you need to know. They're she has emotions, but she doesn't really show them very often. And I remember when my dog Judy was dying, we had to take her into the vet. And when the vet gave her shot, I was inconsolable. And I wailed, and I threw myself on her neck at the moment of her death. And I screamed, "Jesus, come get your dog." And that was the most honest prayer I've ever uttered in my life. Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that I didn't let shame stop me from grieving her in that moment, because it was also an expression of love. Yeah, exactly. For her, which I think those bonds go beyond death.
Agreed. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, thank you. You're moving right through this really well. You've managed to pick up some of the questions we didn't even have to ask.
I wanted to just double back to John, how do you keep yourself resourced? It sounds like as a minister,
important question.
right. You hold a lot of these of your parishioners in your heart. You hold your characters of your book. You've got, I know you're a spiritual director as well. There's a lot of parts of humanity that you bear witness to. And so how do you keep yourself resourced?
I'm in the middle of kind of a huge grief event at the moment. Earlier this year, I suffered sudden severe hearing loss. I am deaf in my right ear, and we have recently discovered a brain tumor that will take the hearing in my left ear. And as you might expect, the prospect of that loss is devastating. And I don't know how I would get through it if I didn't have people around me who love me and uphold me and let me know every day that no matter what happens, that I'm still going to be held in love. So I'm grateful for my wife. I'm grateful for the people at my church and at the church that I serve. I'm grateful for my friends who call and say, what can I do? I'm grateful for my prayer the day after, well, the day I received the diagnosis about the tumor. My wife and I were walking. I said, what am I going to do when I go deaf? And she says, well, you'll learn sign language and you'll go minister in that community. And I go, oh yeah, it won't be the end of the world.
You got to serve.
That's exactly what I'll do. And so the next day, as I was praying, I usually pray using a method that I learned from core shamanism, in that I use active imagination to basically go to Jesus's workshop and sit with him in front of the fireplace. And I tell him what I'm worried about and what I hope for and what's going on that day and what I need help with. And we kind of cuddle. So it's really lovely. And so the day after I received my diagnosis, I was telling him about it. And he said, bodies break. And I took that to mean that it wasn't my fault and that it wasn't God's fault, that things just happen. Bodies break. And that was comforting.
Yeah.
And then he told me, embrace the adventure. And I felt a thrill of hope at that, and even a little bit of excitement. Yeah, this is going to be an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And then he told me to look for things to bless God for. And it doesn't matter what's going on. If I look around, there are always things to bless God for.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
And then he promised me that there would be joy ahead. And I don't know, ever since that prayer session, I have felt grief and I have been scared, but I haven't been overwhelmed by anything. I feel wonderfully supported. I feel hopeful. I feel excited for the future. Even as I grieve the losses that I know that are coming, it's not going to be the end of the world. And in fact, recently I've been told that I am probably a good candidate for cochlear implants. So my deafness may not even be permanent. So that gives me reason for hope too.
That's wonderful, John.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those. I love the visual of active imagination sitting in Jesus' workshop. I'm going to definitely go visit that place.
Oh, you will love it. And he makes great hot cocoa.
Does he? That's really sweet. Thank you. That's a very, very good example of ways that anyone can find their way to comfort.
Mm-hmm.
And to and I also like and think it's important that you notice the importance of accepting grief,
mm-hmm.
and
mm-hmm.
not pushing it away and just being in it, being in the grief, and being in it with your community, including your workshop with Jesus. Yeah, thank you. Beautiful examples.
Yeah.
So is there anything you wish we had asked you that you'd like to tell us about? Or Ana Luisa, were there any of the questions that we really should be checking in
No,
on?
the last one was, what do you wish we had asked?
Yeah.
Well, I can't think of anything. Actually, I feel very complete.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Great. Beautiful.
And thank you so much for asking me. It's wonderful to have opportunities to talk about the deep things of the soul that we don't have a place in our culture for.
That's exactly why we're here.
Yeah.
Truly, like you just said it. I keep hoping that the more we talk about it, the more people can listen to this.
Yeah.
There's going to be conversations amongst people, and it'll be easier and easier to like chat about death, chat about a grief. Hey, friend, I'm losing a toenail. Can we do ritual around it?
Yes.
Anyhow,
Why
that
not?
might be a little too good, but that's the thing. I think culturally, we just always want to appear as though we have nothing going on with our internal lives, our home lives that could cast a shadow of a death. And death is always considered like a body death, but there's, like we said, there's so many different kinds of small deaths every single day.
Yeah.
And let's get used to it. Let's cuddle up with it. And a cup of cocoa.
Cuddle up and have a conversation. A cup of cocoa, yeah. or maybe a little whiskey. Well, thank you. Wow, it's been so great. Totally honor and appreciate who you are and all you do. And as Ana Luisa said, you were one of our favorites when we were in seminary together. And we really do hope that your work continues to feed you and that you get what you need, and know that all of us and all of the folks listening hopefully have gained so much from your willingness to share. Very much appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you. Further up and further in.
Exactly. Yeah.
We will end each episode with a short poem. And this week's poem is by the Rabbi Rami M. Shapiro. Life and death, a twisted vine sharing a single root, a water bright green stretching to top a twisted yellow, only to wither itself as another green unfolds overhead. One leaf atop another, yet under the next, a vibrant tapestry of arcs and falls, all in the act of becoming. Death is a passing of life, and life is the stringing together of so many little passings. You think about that one, Wakil.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. Of course, you and I agree every time. If there's nature in the poem, we're in love.
Yeah.
So I could really just envision that twisted vine and the bright green stretching to cover another bright green. It's so beautiful. Thank you. I think I'll read it again.
Yeah.
So life and death. A twisted vine sharing a single root. A water bright green, stretching to top a twisted yellow, only to wither itself as another green unfolds overhead. One leaf atop another, yet under the next, a vibrant tapestry of arcs and falls, all in the act of becoming. Death is the passing of life, and life is the stringing together of so many little passings.
Oh,
Thank you, Rabbi Rami Shapiro. Beautiful, beautiful. Friends, we have some wonderful guests lined up. In our next episode, we'll be hearing from Patty Bueno, a certified grief counselor, dying consciously teacher, and creator of the Amorte podcast on death and grief education.
And we want to hear from all of you. We know that there are many poignant and moving stories, and we are so excited to share them. You're welcome to email us at endoflifeconvo@gmail.com. That's endoflifeconvo@gmail.com. Please share yourself and your stories.
Thank you. See you next time.
Adios. Thanks so much for joining us on the End of Life Conversations. We appreciate you and look forward to sharing our stories. Thanks to my daughter Lucero and Nico Rush, who have cheerfully assisted us as our editors and tech support. Additional resources, transcript of this episode, and links to our social media will be in the podcast notes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And please subscribe, tell your friends, follow us on social media, and consider supporting us through Patreon. We want to acknowledge that the music we are using was composed and produced by Charles Heastand.